Hi everyone, welcome to Jamie's Musical Heroes, and I'm delighted to be with one of my musical icons, Adrian Snell.
Thank you, Phil. I've rarely been called an icon,
Well,
so that's really
that's
nice
something
start.
positive for the day, isn't it?
Yes.
So Adrian, thank you for the welcome,
It's a pleasure.
and let me just say for one thing, you've written a book recently, 50 years of Adrian Snell, I'm calling this, a long musical
You
journey.
can call it that.
Yeah, can I call it that?
Yes,
There's
you
a
can.
lot, and I would commend it to you guys, really great stuff.
Thank you.
So, Adrian, can we talk about your musical roots and where music started in your life?
Well, home. So my home was a very musical home. Both my parents, although they weren't professional musicians, they loved music and they both played piano. And I grew up really with music all day long, much of the day, in almost every room, whether it be radio or gramophone as it was in those days, whatever, and a piano. Always a piano. I never lived in a home without a piano. So it was entirely natural for me as a sort of 4 or 5 year old to go to the piano and just explore it. And I think what happened was that very early on I discovered that that was a place I could go to say what I was feeling without having to put it into words. So it's becoming my language of self-expression really. And obviously it started off presumably with, you know, very experimental and depending on the size of my hands as to what I could do, but just gradually started to become tunes that I would repeat and discovering nice chords that would go underneath. Okay. So the answer to your question is that's where all of those early influences came from. They came from home, and especially my father, who we were a very deeply Christian home. So the other thing that was happening in parallel to music was faith expression, very naturally.
Right.
I mean,
right.
So Christian faith was a part of family life. And the reason I'm saying that now is that my father every Sunday morning would wake us up effectively with his own rendition of hymns played at the piano, but with his own unique approach to harmony, which was just beautiful.
So I wonder where that came from. Do you know where that
No. Yeah, certainly, because he couldn't read music.
Right, okay.
So somehow, and I think this is a part of my own musicality and my own way of composing undoubtedly reflects that side of my father, because it was it's impossible to describe because I have no recordings of it,
right. But
it was unmistakably him.
Okay.
You knew when you heard his recognizable hymns, you knew it was him playing them.
How about
because of the way he constructed them. And I think that in hindsight was a huge influence on my thinking about writing and harmonic content, chords that go behind a melody. And so yeah, every Sunday morning that became an influence that I even looked forward to, and then gradually found my own path at the piano.
Okay, and you wrote a song very early on, didn't you, which became one of the main songs on, you know, a couple of albums, I think.
Well, yes, and that ties in what I was saying about it being our home being a very deeply Christian home, is that actually the song that we're talking about is called Gethsemane. And this is a song that I wrote, my attempt at understanding something of what Jesus went through in the Garden of Gethsemane before the crucifixion. And again, you know, this was an entirely natural thing to me. It came because I was so challenged by the gospel account of that, but also by now I was beginning to write pieces of music that were complete. They were actual songs, so that I could play them not just to myself, but to other people too. And Gethsemane turned out to be one of the very first, and amazingly for me, that became part of The Passion, probably one of my better known albums, and the fact that I still sing that song to this very day.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that marks a very special moment in my own story.
And then what led you to study music in Leeds? What was the sort of path?
Well, the path there, it was, first of all, I knew that if it were possible, I would love to make music my career. But imagine, you know, how hard it was anyway to make any sort of a career in music. There was no way I was going to be a classical musician, I wouldn't have been good enough anyway as a pianist, but that wasn't what I was drawn to. I certainly didn't want to teach music. So I was seriously limiting. If I was going to make a career in music, well, what? You know, what are you going to do?
For sure.
So there were other possibilities around that time. So whilst I was at sixth form, and you know, as we were going to think about what was going to be my career, we did think about business of some sort, because I was quite intrigued by and interested in business in a broader sense.
Okay.
But what changed it was suddenly finding this course that was at Leeds Music College, and the title of the course was The Advanced Study of Jazz and Light Music. Dreadful title for a course. You wouldn't sell that very well these days.
No.
And you know, it brings into question what on earth is light music.
Yes.
Well, you kind of know what it is.
Yeah.
And that's why I hated it so
It's
much.
sort of, it's like light margarine or
Yeah,
something.
absolutely.
I don't know.
I think of supermarket music.
Yes,
Yeah.
supermarket, yeah.
I mean, I did. I was going to make a career playing music as people brought their cereals, you know, and no, thank you.
Okay.
However, what I did understand by that was that it was something very different from a standard sort of classical course. And I did like jazz. I mean, certainly jazz wasn't my main focus, but I enjoyed particularly modern jazz. I certainly love blues. And I just thought to myself, well, if I can get on that course, surely it's going to lead me closer to where it is I'm thinking I might end up than by doing a classical course. So with my parents' blessing, which is amazing, really, considering the risk, I went up and I auditioned. And the funny sort of side story to this is that piano was my main instrument for sure, and so I played a little bit of piano to them. But I could tell that they were very keen for me to play the other instrument that I was studying at the time, which was double bass. I couldn't quite work out why, because it's not the most delightful instrument to hear as a solo.
Solo, right.
What I did realise, though, in hindsight, was it was because they were desperate for double bass players. Of all the students, I think there was maybe one other double bass player.
Right.
So actually, the fact that I could play it was all that mattered, and then I was offered my place. And important just to say, in terms of this decision to go to music college, for our younger viewers, you know, I'm sorry about this. This is going to make you probably a little bit jealous, but there was no cost involved because the government paid, if you qualify, government paid for your education and your accommodation and a bit more besides, so you could actually eat. So that's important to say, because if I'd have started out on a course that 3 years later was going to leave me with £20,000 debt or something, I suspect I wouldn't have done it.
Right.
Especially a course that's so risky. Because to go after 3 years with £20,000 debt into a career in music, it's like, come on.
Yeah, sure.
But that wasn't the case. So I was so fortunate that effectively I was paid to study music, and more importantly in this context, to develop my own music, because what that time did was it gave me many, many hours every day to sit at a beautiful grand piano and start to find myself musically.
Right, amazing. So at what stage were you thinking then about making albums and actually sort of, you know, really putting the songs together that you were composing at that time? Well, we jumped a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, no, but that's right, because very
progression.
quickly, actually, once you're in that position and you are beginning to write material, and of course the huge advantage of being in a music college is that you've got your peers, and you've got, you know, both in terms of teachers and lecturers, but also fellow students who are going to hear some of what you're doing and are going to make comments. You know? Right. So a very vulnerable time, because I'd never had that before, other than family criticism. You know, this was about having professionals make judgments on what I was writing. But what was very clear very early on was that, okay, I've made a decision here that I want to make, if it's possible, a career around my own music. Then I better start writing material and making sure it's captured in some way, whether it be making demo recordings or finalizing it in such a way that if somebody says, can you play that song, I can play it, you know, they can hear it. And the logical conclusion from that was, well, I I want to record, you know. I mean, clearly, if I'm a singer-songwriter, what I'm looking for here is recording contract and gigs, you know.
Of course, yeah.
And that's, so what happened was, began to get a few opportunities to perform, mainly through friends who'd become students in other colleges and universities, who would arrange for me to play there at the Students' Union or something. So that began to open my eyes and ears to what it was like to actually perform in front of an audience, some of whom would have had no idea what my music was like.
How would the performance be advertised? Because I remember seeing Liberation Suite in the early 70s at UEA, and they were advertised as a Christian rock band, and so we had two people and a dog.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say a dog.
It was a dog. There's a dog there. The dog quite liked it. But you know, they all kept away in hordes. And it was a fantastic concert.
You raise exactly, well, it's a huge issue in that the decisions I made at that time and the way I began to be described were to have an effect for the rest, and still do, of my recording life. What do I mean by that? Well, exactly what you said, really, that unfortunately, certainly in this country, so it's not true of everywhere, but certainly culturally in this country, the phrase Christian music, certainly then, sent the message that overtly Christian, so quite evangelistic, possibly even you know, asking people to stand if they wanted to accept Jesus as their saviour. Lyrically, maybe rather narrow. So a kind of narrow worldview, quite possibly where the music didn't come first, which would be the worst thing of all, to be an artist, a musician on the stage who didn't really care about the music that much. And I think that reputation, very sadly, grew, perhaps partly justifiably. So let's be honest.
Yeah,
there was some
I think
very
right.
poor Christian music around at the time. And where I was able to play without that kind of a label was just amazing. I mean, people are very generous, I think, in terms of being prepared to listen to something new. So if you can shed the label, and people will come and they just hear me at the piano, to be honest, there was some fantastic responses. And, you know, I didn't know what to expect, but you know, I had clearly developed a very original style of, particularly then, piano and voice. But when the label was a Christian musician, then exactly the same problem. So you'd have, you'd either have an extremely narrow audience of fellow-minded Christians, or very few people. So yeah, I think sadly that was an issue right from the start, and you know, I need to take responsibility for that, because a lot of that, if you like, statement about being a Christian musician came from my own insecurity. The desire to say, this is who I am, don't mess with it. You know.
Interesting.
And I think, you know, that's kind of immaturity, really.
Tell me about Lee Abbey. And
Lee Abbey.
Well, you don't have to.
No, I want to tell you about Lee Abbey.
Tell me Lee Abbey.
So Lee Abbey, on the North Devon coast. So there's Lynmouth and there's Linton, and then just beyond the town of Linton there's Lee Abbey. One of the most beautiful places on planet Earth, in my opinion. But Lee Abbey is a Christian community, and they offer retreats, holidays, educational things, respite. I mean, there are, and there have been now for many, many years, this just beautiful place of peace and exploration. Exploration intellectually, spiritually, but also because of the estate, you know, even the place itself. To cut a long story short, my parents took me there when I was 1. Don't remember that. But at the age of sort of 12, 13, we started to go back there as a family, and it was the place that I absolutely loved. What was so lovely about it too was that I started to play there for people, and of course it was the most nurturing environment, because although most people there were Christian. They came from many different Christian persuasions from different areas of the church. They weren't by any means all evangelical or all this.
Yeah.
So I had very early on an amazing environment for playing my music, having a ready-made audience who would critique.
Yeah.
And I would say, if there's one other place more than home, or other than home, that was an influence on my musical journey, it was Lee Abbey at that time, because I was able to go there, began to go there probably almost every year with the family, and then, and I'm sort of moving the clock forward here, but then around the time of the beginning of my recording career, amazingly starting to be invited as a guest artist.
Okay.
So as opposed to being on a paid holiday, I was coming more in a professional capacity and leading weeks or performing to the guests that were there at the time.
Lovely.
So it gave me this amazing forum, really, for exploring my own music, but having a ready-made audience and developing wonderful people there on the community who are also very musical.
Right.
So beginning to collaborate with others and writing material together and all this sort of stuff. So yes, Lee Abbey played a massively important part of it.
And very inspirational for actually composing songs, because you wrote your first album pretty well at Lee Abbey, I believe.
Well, that's absolutely a very important part of this, is that I left music college slightly early.
Okay.
And the decision I made was to go down to Lee Abbey to complete the writing of material for a possible first album.
Okay.
And by then, again, I'm curtailing the story a little bit, by then I had kind of realised that I'd closed off a lot of options in terms of mainstream recording because of this concern about, the big bad world out there. Yeah. And I had a Christian recording company express a lot of interest in me, and had started to say, we'd like to do an album with you, a first album. And what happened was I went to Lee Abbey at the end of my music college career, completed the writing of material, and then after I had 3 months at Lee Abbey, and then I went straight to the recording studio.
Right.
So, in every respect, that place bridges lots of transitions in my life in a very special way.
Remarkable. And on a little toll booth that runs through, there's this "I love Adrian" on back by someone.
I hope you didn't write that.
No, I think it was in the book. I found that.
Okay. Well, yes. So the context. There is a context for that.
Right. Okay.
Which is.
It wasn't Sue, of course, was it?
No, no, it wasn't. I don't think I even met her then.
No.
But this was. So Lee Abbey has a toll road run through it.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of the toll road, tiny little wooden hut, and when I went down there for 3 months, I was only allowed to do that by joining the community.
Okay.
And on the community, you did have to take some responsibilities. I couldn't just sit in a room and play piano.
No.
But I got an incredibly luxurious position there. I'll tell you how luxurious it was, namely that I would sit in that toll booth collecting people's fares, and then on the dot of 3:30, I'd have members of the community bring me a cream tea.
Fantastic.
Because the Lee Abbey
Devon
cream tea cottage was just by the toll.
Oh, was it really? Okay.
Imagine.
Yeah.
But I also seemed to grow some interest from some of the community girls.
Okay.
And that's where it turns out that there was some rather lovely graffiti.
Right, very nice.
And I assume I was the Adrian they were referring to.
It may not be.
It could be another Adrian.
Yeah.
So yes, it was in hindsight idyllic.
Right.
I was very fortunate.
Right, lovely place.
What a place to sort of, as a pause between education and getting out there and trying to find out, did I have a future as a singer-songwriter, as an artist?
We remember hearing John Michael Talbot there for the first time.
At Lee Abbey?
At Lee Abbey, in the chapel.
Yes. Oh, chapel's beautiful.
So it was such a nice time there. And tell me a little bit about the sort of more secular managers and companies that were showing interest in you as well, because there were some little challenges over chapel music, and you met the Kinks manager and this sort of thing.
I remember this with mixed feelings, because it was exciting, and I was, of course I was delighted as an artist that there was interest being shown in me from publishers like Chapels and from a setup like the Kinks Management. But the mixed bit is the realization that I went into all of that still as a rather sheltered, rather fearful young Christian man, fearful of, am I stepping out into a world that's going to dilute my Christian faith, and am I going to be forced to change things I don't want to change? And so there was an immaturity around it, but it was what it was. And what happened really was that, and there are two separate occasions, but the context was the same, namely that I was invited to meet the Kinks Management, perform for them, and meet Chapel's publishers and talk about some of my material. And in both occasions, the kind of questioning to me was, okay, we love the music you're writing here, words are okay, but can we think about material that's less overtly religious? So an example of that would be a song that I remember listening to with the Chapels guy, which began with the words, "Lord, there are so many ways. Lord, I'm lost and it's hard to pray." And he loved the song, and he just said, all we need to do really would be to switch the word girl for Lord. And then we've got a song, it almost works throughout, and then it's commercial. Now, a mature person, like if I were in that meeting today, will probably listen to that and either say, hey, I can see that working, or no, that's what it is. Right. But I hear what you're saying, and certainly let me explore some other ideas in terms of material that serve a broader audience. But for me, it was like it was a fearful moment of, oh my goodness, is this what I'm stepping into? Right. So with both sets of people, I think I kind of burned some bridges then out of that kind of fear. And that's what led to the only option really as a potential recording artist, which was to record with a company that already held my Christian viewpoint. Right.